Hello, everybody, and welcome to Fak'ugesi Online 2020, Power to the Pixel. My name is Natalie Baneng, and I am the host for Fak'ugesi Online. And today we have a talk, and the topic of the talk today is People of Play with Limpho Moeti, the importance of being authentic and the commodification of Black pain. And I'm just going to start off by basically reading Limpho's biography, and then we're going to meet her and then we're going to hear what she has to say. She has really dope ideas, and we're really keen and excited to hear what she has to say on the Fak'ugesi platform. So Limpho Moeti previously worked at Free Lives, Broforce, and Gorn, and was Deputy Festival Director of South African Playful Media Festival, Playtopia. She currently works as a producer and biz dev at Nyamakop, developing African-inspired video games. She is one half of Bad Form podcast. In her spare time, she thinks of ways to smash patriarchy, topple capitalism, and who is the best Batman. She is definitely not a robot sent from the future to destroy humans, but her boss did call her the nuclear bomb of BizDev. So welcome, Dimpo. We're super excited. You can introduce yourself and let us know what you're going to share with us tonight.
Hi everyone, I'm so grateful to be here. I really hope you all enjoy my talk. It's called The Importance of Being Authentic. Let's see if I can get my keynote to work without causing a nuclear meltdown in my house. The answer is no. Yes, okay, great. Hopefully you're seeing the correct side of my screen. Hi everyone, I'm Dimpho. I love video games. I'm gonna start off this way, and I think what I want to talk to today, when I talk about the importance of being authentic, is looking at how Africa as a continent is currently represented in pop culture and in the media, as well as looking at the majority of stories around Black people are being told. If I'm really honest, this talk is just a Trojan horse for me to speak about my deep, somewhat obsessive, and probably a little disturbing love for the multitudes within Black people. And, just really complaining about how the media really has done us, people of color, and particularly Africans, really dirty. So who am I? I'm the business developer. As Natalie said, I'm the business developer and producer for Nyamakop. I was previously at Three Lives. I was the deputy festival director for Playtopia, which is an event that happens in December in Cape Town under the banner of Africa Games Week. And today I'm primarily talking about the Black experience because, I'm a Black woman, and because we're in Africa. But really, if there are any other people of color who feel cut off and alienated from your culture, then this talk is for you as well. So the first thing I want to do is I want to look at the, my notes say the fucking problem for Africa, which is that it's always in pop culture shown as unclean, uncivilized. It's always townships and dirt roads and bicycles and donkey carts. And it's this deeply problematic idea that makes us believe that by and large, Africa is still this dark, untamed jungle ripe for Europe to still come and plunder and take all the resources from, that we can't look after ourselves. It really does perpetuate a very problematic narrative. The second thing we see all the time are fucking mud huts. I remember I watched a rom-com called He's Not That Into You, and this came out in like 2008, 2009. And they literally had Black people sitting in front of mud huts like these, using some like fake made up clicking language, talking about how he probably forgot your mud hut number. I mean, I always knew rom-coms were disappointing, excuse me, but not like that. And definitely not in a Hollywood blockbuster, and not at a point where, Google existed and you could find some accurate representation if you're going to show like an African village, or just use a real language from the continent. There are thousands. And it still perpetuates that idea of us being very backwards and being very dismissive and disrespectful towards cultures that come from the continent of Africa. The final thing you see a lot is just rolling savannas and jungles and giraffes and elephants and just constantly making us look backwards, uncivilized, unimportant, and small. And, you know, I will jokingly refer to my cat as a lion, but eventually I have to stop with people from Europe or the United States because there's like a 40% chance they think I'm actually talking about a real lion. I even had someone ask me if it's true that lions walk up and down the highways, and it's not. um, I mean, like usually what I like to show is this is from Accra, right? Is that we are a developed, interesting country, that there is so much more to us than mud huts and dirt roads and townships and animals. We have high-speed internet. Our internet is better than some of the internet in the United States. Fun fact for the day. You know, we're not just the small middle of nowhere-ness for the entire continent, and there's just such a plurality in the experiences here that I think it's very easy to forget that. And it's very easy to get sucked into believing that through this continuous pushing of this idea of Africa and how it's perceived, that we're somehow lesser, that we have less, that we're less talented, that what we create is less good. And it's complete nonsense. I mean, look at how gorgeous Johannesburg is. We have cities, we have all the accoutrements of first world nations or developed nations, whatever you want to call it. We have in South Africa, in Nigeria, in Kenya, thriving technological hubs where a lot of new, interesting, and exciting things are happening. We've got business centers, we've got clubs. I mean, I haven't been to a club in like 4 years. I mean, partially because of the pandemic, but also because I'm just really old and like a grumpy old woman at this stage. And, you know, I think it's important for us to remember that and to keep that in mind if we want to tell stories for the continent, to also think about ways that we want to represent ourselves and how we want to represent people. This moves me quite nicely onto sort of my second point, or as I like to call it, my second complaint with pop culture, is how intensely we have, or capitalism rather, has commodified Black pain. And I understand how it happened, right? Initially, it was this effort to get people to empathize with the plight that Black people face, you know, but in the end, what it's done is it's created that for Africans and the African diaspora in the West or anywhere else in the world, is that the defining feature of our Blackness beyond poverty is pain. If it's a story set in the past, it's always about the horrors and the pain of slavery and colonialism and how difficult it is to be Black. If it's set in the present, you know, even incredibly exciting, well-written, experimental, innovative shows such as Atlanta, or movies such as Sorry to Bother You and The Last Black Man in San Francisco, there is still this consistent through line of pain, to the point where our very existence a lot of the time is that you can't even exist in a movie without people automatically assuming it's about pain, it's about systemic racism, it is quote unquote political, right? I mean, there are 2 tweets that just keep me up at night, which is this idea that it's white and it's political, it's male and it's political, it's straight or it's political. And a big part of why there is that assumption of politicalness is because of the way it feels necessary to sort of force people to understand what we go through. And so it becomes around the pain and the suffering and the struggle of Blackness rather than anything else. And it's really unfortunate. And okay, the next slide is not broken. It is supposed to say image not found. It's supposed to look like this. And too often we are just wholesale cut out of the future entirely. My favorite example of this is a comic book created by DC called The Legion of Superheroes. And even in the early 2000s, this book is set in the 31st century, so it's like 1,000 years from now. And there was not a single Black person. The team had 15 people, not one of them was Black. One of them was Asian, and he was called Karate Kid. It's awkward. None of the supporting characters were Black. None of the background extras and the panels were Black. And the excuse they gave is that all of the Black people moved to an island or or like a country that disappeared and reappeared every 50 years. They could not even imagine a future where Black people are treated with dignity and respect 1,000 years from now. And it was so bad, all the Black people had to pack up and leave. And that's their excuse for why there were no Black people in the comic book. It's not a vibe. I will, however, shout out Star Trek, because Star Trek is always showing us the luxurious space communism we deserve. And it's been on the forefront of having people of color in prominent roles from the very beginning in the 60s, which is incredible. So this brings us to sort of what it is that we at Nyamakop are trying to do, and something that's very important to me. And we get to look at beautiful African wedding dresses, which is just mwah. Okay, so our goal is to make African-inspired games for a global audience, one that focuses on authenticity. We want to celebrate and highlight the plurality of the thousands of cultures in this continent, but also to imagine them in the future. How will our cultures change and grow in the next 100, 200, 300 years? How will our continent grow and change? Too often, with a lot of Afrofuturist games that I've seen, and I'm not going to mention any names because I don't want to get in any trouble. Um, it's always still this like, yeah, there's technology, but it's very much what I call Wakandified, where they take bits and pieces from various cultures and kind of mesh them all together, where, you know, it's in the future, but Africa still is covered in mud huts and nature. And it doesn't show a technological future. It doesn't show one where Africa not only survives, but thrives. And I think that that is really sad. So what we're doing is we want to highlight the abilities and the great things within the various cultures by focusing in on specific cultures and imagining those specific cultures in the future. The reason I have these three sort of wedding outfits and wedding pictures up is because I think it's also important for us to remember how a culture has grown and changed already. In the yellow dress, we have an Isipedi wedding gown. It is still very strongly tied to the heritage and the culture, but it's modernized, it's updated. The same in the middle from my people, the Basotho. It's gorgeous, it's cultural, it's updated, it's new. And finally, the same with the Igbo tribe from Nigeria. I think it's very easy to forget how already our culture, the way we see ourselves, the way we keep the good and actively fight against the bad within our cultures, grow and change as we grow and change as a society. And I think it's very vital to hold on to that and to be proud of that. Too often it feels like our stories always look down on our cultures and treat them as backwards, when in fact, they not only make up a huge part of us, but they're also a huge part of the reason that we can love and understand ourselves, even in a 21st century, in a very Western, excuse me, Eurocentric, Western Eurocentric society. And beyond that, beyond just the multitudes within African cultures, within our cities, within our heritage, within our people and our countries, I think that part of telling this kind of story is breaking down the idea of the one true Black person, of this idea of there's one way to be Black. I always say this because it's very true, but there are two things that haunt me. And the first one is the infamous and incredible Toni Morrison quote, which I will read in full. The function, the very serious function of racism is distraction. It keeps you from doing your work. It keeps you explaining over and over again your reason for being. Somebody says you have no language, so you spend 20 years proving that you do. Someone says that your head isn't shaped properly, so you have scientists working on the fact that it is. Someone says you have no art, so you dredge that up. Someone says you have no kingdoms, so you dredge that up. None of this is necessary. There will always be one more thing. And for me, the reason that this quote is so vital and important is because it's making me understand that while we should still very intensely focus on current systemic racism and issues, even within the gaming industry, I am literally one of maybe 10 Black women in the country in video games. If I'm like super generous about how we count who is and isn't in video games. Um, and these are all issues we absolutely need to focus on and shine a light on and work through. We need to understand the effects the past has had on us and continue to push for systemic change. But a second part of that, I think a part we forget is asking ourselves who it is we want to be. But I'll get more into that a bit later. The second thing I'm haunted by is just the multitudes that Blackness holds, just the immense amount of different personalities, different things that we love that is often not shown or acknowledged, and a lot of the time is denigrated and looked down on. But like now I'm going to just get on the hype train and show some amazing, different, interesting like hobbies Black people have. So the first one, this beautiful goddess, is actually from a photo shoot for Black people in fantasy realms, because oftentimes Black people barely ever make the cut into fantasy and were never shown regally and beautifully. We have, oh no, there go my, there we go. We have on the left side a Black goddess, Bast, very Egyptian. We have a Black elf, which you literally never seen, looking like a warrior queen. I love it. And because I'm a huge fantasy and Dungeons and Dragons nerd, this brings me unbridled joy to see how we're starting to celebrate different ways of being Black and celebrate our nerdiness. I think it's important to see ourselves powerfully. It's a power fantasy that makes you imagine yourself being anyone or anything and being able to take on anyone or anything. And that's the vital importance of representation and being seen in as much media as we possibly can. On the left side, we have a Black comic book geek dressed up as Hawkman, and he can get it. We have a beautiful goth girl who is dressed somewhat like Death from the Sandman series. She can get it. She looks incredible. It's awesome. Did you guys know we have Black metalhead cowboys in Botswana? We have kawaii, weeaboo Black women who love anime and Lolita and getting dressed up as Lolitas. And Lolita Kawaii woman is what I have in my notes. And finally, my favorite, the manic pixie Black girl. This woman is my style icon. I think, as I said, we're not just thinking about, we shouldn't only focus on the structural issues that need to change, but we need to start asking ourselves and questioning and imagining, what does our aspirational future look like? Who do we want to be? Are we okay with just being the, side characters in our own stories? Green Book, Crash, just tons of them. Do we want our do we want to be accepted just by our closeness to whiteness? I don't think so. I think we can and should be better than that, that we can and should do more than that. And we should start thinking about the ways our continent can be in the future and looking at it with hope and optimism. I want us to make games that small Black kids play. I want them to feel seen. I want them to feel like there's multiple ways of being Black, that you can be proud of your culture. I mean, it's a journey I had to make because the messaging around my culture was so messed up and brutal for so long. I want us to trash the idea of coconuts or acting white or being ashamed of our culture and our ancestors, because the idea of coconuts and acting white is just another way that we ourselves exclude ourselves from specific industries, specific hobbies. We try and control who can be Black, and like we try to perpetuate the idea that there is one proper way to be really Black, and all we're doing is we're hurting ourselves. And when white people pull that shit, all you're doing is asking for like a clap. You can't do it. If you're a white person, never say that to a Black person ever. Sorry, that's just a mini rant. So my conclusion is, as my problematic savior Vince Staples said, the next Bill Gates could be in Section 8 up in the projects. They could be in Ghana, they can be here in South Africa, they can be in Nigeria, they can be in the South Side in Chicago or the Bronx or what's it, Hell's Kitchen or whatever. Let's unashamedly make our games and our art that shows our culture, that is not respectable for its closeness to whiteness. Let us just unashamedly be ourselves, unabashedly loud, proud, and awesome. We can no longer think that the one thing that ties us together as a continent or as Black people around the world is the pain that we experienced, but rather the successes and the beauty inherent within our cultures. I've been Limpho Moeti. Thank you so much. I'm ready for your questions, complaints, comments. Let's get it. Thank you all so much for coming to my talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Simpo. I think I relate as a pixie, very weirdo Black girl. I think this was a really necessary talk. And I think from the perspective that is like, I really liked the way you spoke about things being Wakandified, because I feel like sometimes it actually uses like an authentic place to like say, where is this from? Like, what culture are you actually referencing?
Exactly.
So much more
And I
work
mean,
we
like,
do.
exactly. And like, I'm also okay with Wakandification to a degree. I mean, I cried watching Black Panther, seeing, and it made me sad that that was the first time I saw my culture shown technologically advanced and experimental and interesting. And like seeing the Basutu blankets being used as a force field was incredible. But I also knew it wasn't really the Basutu blankets because it was the Wakandan tribe, and like everything is all meshed together. But I think that we can just do so much better than that.
Yeah. Very necessary. Okay,
Absolutely.
so I think I did forget to actually mention this earlier, but if there are any questions, may you please make use of the chat section to pose your questions. But I mean, this is a pretty small group, so maybe if anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask them for any questions, you're free to do so um, right now. So if anybody has anything to say, please feel free.
Yeah. I promise I don't bite unless I'm asked
I mean, I'll ask. So like what
to.
I mean, I think you did speak about Nyamakop and
Mm.
all that, but I think could you give us maybe a bit more of like the kind of projects that you have, like the range, the audience? Because I think that's also something that like is really important, just knowing like how you take these ideas and translate them into real things and real games, and like the proof of what you're speaking of, the authenticity, is that present
Yeah,
in what you guys do?
it is. It's a little bit tricky. I'm under some NDAs, so I have to make sure that like my creative director isn't going to like come out from behind my curtains and
Maybe
like
it works,
just shoot me.
maybe not,
So
maybe
what I
work.
can say is that we are working on an African science fiction game at the moment, an Afrofuturist game. And a big thing for us has just been doing a lot of research and ensuring that the majority of the people working on the game are from the continent, are Black people from the continent, so that there is that touch of authenticity. We're working with a really great African science fiction writer in terms of the narrative. And also, a lot of the concept art has actively focused on, okay, this person, for example, is Zulu, for example. What elements from the isiZulu culture can we imagine futuristically? What would a futuristic warrior from KwaZulu Natal look like? what would our cities be like if we just had all the technology we wanted? Would it be very colorful? Would it be eco-cities? Like what is the best possible version futuristically of each culture that we choose to represent? And then we also just have a small number. So we're not trying to represent 20 or 30, but rather, you know, 6 or 7, and really
Mm,
focusing in on those individual cultures and how to show them as authentically as possible.
mm,
I know that like as we get further on in the process, we're definitely going to be looking into getting sensitivity readers, and particularly people from those cultures, to make sure that we're not
mm,
making it a caricature or a little too otherworldly. And so we've done a lot of research into Afrofuturism, into a lot of artists on the continent to create Afrofuturistic art, a lot of looking at a lot of fashion, and like what does fashion made on the continent that adds in elements from the individual cultures look like and feel like. How does it change as we move forward in time? And so that's been like a big part of the process.
mm. Tegan asked, "What do young African women want to see in games, and how do you assess and understand this?"
um it also is so I
Sure.
think how this translates into games, I think, is it's very much that representation, that feeling that we can be allowed to do anything and be anywhere. Very much, I think that there's still this persistent idea that video games are not necessarily for Black people, which is crazy. There was a study done by, what is it, Nielsen in the United States, that showed like 77% of African Americans play video games, which is higher than any other population group in the United States. But we don't make games that speak specifically to people of color, and particularly to women. So I think for me, and definitely just this is just my experience of what it is I want in video games, is I want a game that shows a plurality of Black women in various different roles. Some who are strong, some who are super nerdy and awkward and weird and weak, in the sense of like, not just this one idea of the hardcore, strong, Black, sassy Black woman, because I don't think we're really allowed to exist in any other way in the media, in games, other than that. So I think games that speak authentically, not just around cultures, but also individuals, I think that's what people want. They want to feel seen, heard, and understood, and be in games that have solid stories, great graphics, and are interesting. Also, I see in the chat that Afrofuturism is kind of a European construct. I mean, a little, it's more like an African diaspora construct, but it's very difficult because we also have to understand that we're not just making our game for the people on the continent, but for the African diaspora around the world. So while our game, our beliefs, and the way that we're going about this align more accurately with African science fiction, it's usually an easier shorthand to just call it Afrofuturism, because the diaspora then will understand and be able to connect to it in the same way Africans will. I struggle a little bit with the differentiation. I think that I'm always a believer that that rather than trying to make new things, if something is a little bit problematic, you can rather change it and make it your own. And so for me personally, and this is a conversation I have with my creative director all the time, is what does and doesn't count as Afrofuturism? And is it really reasonable for the idea of what Afrofuturism is and how it could be to be wholly controlled by people in the West? It feels to me like another moment where Africans are condescended, patronized towards, and looked down on, and our voices are shut out from that conversation around pop culture and media and what Afrofuturism is or could be, and sort of dividing us and making African science fiction its own very specific thing.
Great. So
Mm.
we also have Tabo who would like to ask a question. So I'm assuming that Tabo's going to unmute and address you. Tabo, are you there?
Tegan, we need to have a chat because that's exactly right. The European art scene just takes everything and ruins it.
So yeah, I'm not sure if Tabo is going to ask his question, but
If I can pose it meanwhile. Yeah.
yes, yes, yes.
Um, Thank you for like a good presentation. I'm
Thank
wondering
you.
about like, can you tell us a bit more about like your journey? Like, how did you start with games? Is I don't know any education or is it indie? How does it work? And then also I was wondering, like, what is the biggest challenge? Is it being black or woman, or is it just the same?
Okay, so I'm smiling because honestly, if I'm very honest, the answer is both. Both. It's just both.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're like, am I being spoken over and interrupted all the time because I'm a woman or because I'm a black woman? That's fine, whatever. I don't have a drinking problem. No, I think, look, the biggest thing, let me start with my journey. So my journey is that I've always, from a child, loved storytelling and writing and the arts. So I started out in sort of high school doing the raps plays, which happened at Bits. And I fell in love with theater and I decided that I really wanted to live in a cardboard box and have no money. And I started studying theater. A year later, I got introduced to sort of the film course and I fell in love with that. So I moved to so I moved towards film and screenwriting, which I really enjoyed. I studied it for a long time, but I actually never completed it. Unfortunately, my dad died of cancer and I just kind of could never go back, but it's okay. And I got the opportunity to work as a personal assistant at a game studio and I jumped at it with both hands. I'd worked in the film industry for about a year doing like adverts and working for not an ad agency, but a production company that primarily did adverts. And I hated every second of it. It made me miserable. I felt worried about sort of the industry in South Africa and how cliquey it was. And when I got given the opportunity to work at a game studio, I jumped at it with both hands. I'd been playing video games since I was 12. Oh God, that's 18 years. I'm okay. I'm okay. Um, and once I got into it, it really just felt like home. It felt like the thing that I was meant to be doing. And so I've always kept that interest in sort of narrative game design. And a big part of it was also, for a long time, I helped organize the game jams. So I went to a lot of the game jams, even if I didn't jam myself. And I threw myself into the sort of event circuits. Whenever I was given the opportunity to go to an event, I would. And it really made me fall more and more in love with games. And I was involved however I could be, volunteering a little bit, doing talks, doing panels, and then eventually helping to be one of the, I don't know, creators of Playtopia, I guess, which was incredible. But onto your second question, which is harder being Black or being a woman, it's 100% both. It can be quite difficult because there's just not a lot of us in the industry. So it can feel overwhelming and sometimes a little bit alienating, and like these spaces aren't for you. But I just can be kind of petty, stubborn, and spiteful. So I was like, well, fuck you, I'll make the space mine. And sort of reminded myself that no one can make me feel welcome in a space because it is not their space to welcome me into. I inherently deserve to be here just because. Nobody can welcome me into the space. No one can open the keys to me, or, and I think there is work to be done into creating safe environments for people of color or queer people or anyone from a marginalized group. But a big thing for me was just changing that mindset and being like, I deserve to be here because I'm good at what I do and I'm talented, just like anyone else here. And if anyone tries to make this uncomfortable for people like me or look down on me for my gender or my race, I will flame them in real life and I'll shit talk them and I'll prove them wrong. But it's not easy. I mean, I'm I'm on a lot of antidepressants and I have no money because therapy is really expensive, guys. If I can give you a recommendation, just learn from your mistakes, don't have a mental illness. That's my answer. It's a little bit glib. If that gets put onto Twitter, I'm just going to be cancelled. Nyamakop producers tells people to not have mental illness. God.
Thank you for the answer. And sorry
Thank you
if
for
I
the question as
might
well.
have taken your space for questioning. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no. More Black people, more Black women in games. Just do it. We'll start a coalition.
Thank you, Sumbu. Sumbu. Next up, we have Tabo who has a question, and then I'm gonna go over to the next question after Tabo.
All right. Can you guys hear me?
Yes. Hi, Tavo.
Hey, Limpho, how you doing?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. So the question that I have is, firstly, I'd like to thank you for the talk. It was really dope. I
Thank
really,
you.
I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but I fucks with your energy. I like what you speak about. And
Thank you.
something that I also want to do, in my life as a Black creator. I want to bring more people up just like me and, tell our stories the way we want to and also make money from that. And the questions that I have for you are based on that, the money aspect and the storytelling aspect. So the first one is, how do we as Black creatives go out there, pitch? Let me say this like this. How do we as Black creatives come together and create content that is not only of our origins, but it's also like really dope, and get funding for it? And if we want to preserve our culture as Africans, can we do it without including other races? Because a lot of races do that thing where the Asians will produce a film by themselves, or white people do the same. And can we do that as Black people, where we come together and we produce a film or a game content, whatever, without including the other races? And if we do, let's say, work with other races, what obstacles do we face in that sense? Does the whole thing about class seedings come through? Does it happen? Can you only to a certain point? And then another question that I have is,
I feel like you need to write some of these down. I should take notes.
I'm really sorry. I got too excited. So the second question, you mentioned that you used to work for film and advertising. So I want to reference like two of the shows that I've recently watched on Netflix and HBO. I don't know if you're familiar with Kipo. I
haven't seen Kipo yet. I'm hyped though.
Check it out. It's really insane. It's also like Black narrative, but surprisingly, it's done by a white guy. And all of this, like I think 4 of the characters out of the 6 are Black. And music is about Black people. There's also another show on HBO called Lovecraft County.
Oh yes, Lovecraft Country.
That's also like white made, but the story is Black. It's like it has that.
I think I know the showrunner is Black, and a lot of the writers are actually Black as well, even though the book originally was written by a white guy.
Yeah. So for me, the next question is then, how do we stop that? How do we? It's not a bad thing, these are like 2 of my favorite shows, but how do these shows get so much recognition and so much funding, and they can move on for so many seasons? And then you look at another show that's similar, Random Acts of Flyness, that has been created by a Black person, and the whole narrative of the show is what Black people go through, the narrative, how we adjust as a community, the trend that we set. And the guy in the whole season was just asking for funding, he was asking for funding, and he never got a season 2. So how do we create our own content that's really true and that speaks the truth, and we Black in the whole team, and we continue to get the funding? So I think both the same, the two questions that I asked you?
Sure. So I think, I mean, I'm going to make a joke first. Nyamakop cares a lot about diversity. So we have a diversity program for white men because it's so difficult to find white men in the gaming industry. At the moment, 8% of our studio is white men. We're hoping that by 2024, 2025, we can upgrade that to 15%. But it's just, they just don't put the culture. It's just very difficult. And of course, most of these white men are named Ben, so we're trying to diversify, maybe find a Josh, Nyana, a Tom or something. Okay, that's my joke. Oh, God. So
How
look,
many bands in the gaming industry, though?
dude, there are, I think I counted once, and at that point, I knew more white men named Ben than black women in the industry. I started drinking about that point. I know 7.
Wow.
Yeah,
We should
I
make
work
a
with
game
2
of
of them.
know.
It's hunting season on game dev bands. Okay, anyway, so on a serious note, in terms of funding is very difficult. So my creative director and I talk about this at length, right? And we talk about why, particularly in the South African gaming industry, it's kind of worked out to be predominantly white men. And the answer is essentially because of apartheid. I mean, that's a glib way of answering it, but the reality is that white people in general just have more familial and generational wealth or stabilities in ways that black people generally don't. And so it's easier to like live at home with your parents and take a loan from your parents, or use your parents' credit to spend the amount of money you'd need to spend to make a viable prototype that you can then start, showing to various publishers or VCs and games. And that's just not something that we have. It's not something that I have. It costs a lot of money to make like a good prototype. So a big step that's missing, even with a lot of like gaming publishers and studios talking about Black Lives Matter and their funds, is that none of those funds are prototyping funds. And like what we really need is prototyping money. I mean, a second issue I think is that, and this is not to say that like the white people in our industry are racist or horrible people. They're not. They're genuinely lovely, genuinely quite progressive. They do believe in transformation and, nurturing black talent. I think that maybe some of them don't have the tools necessary to do so in a healthy way. And secondly, that we don't question why aren't wealthier black kids who are creative, who have the familial wealth, who like video games and are interested in game development, aren't entering our industry as well. So I think that's a big thing. It's just like the hope that, as more people become interested in our industry, as we're able to make it more stable, as we're able to show more and more of the things we can do, that we can create, I mean, like, such a complicated answer. You can tell me if I'm rambling. Like, like that's one part of it. The other problem is that we have a very punk, very independent industry that's based around like your idea, and a lot of people don't like what I do, which is business development. It's literally myself and Nick Hall and maybe Luke Lamont from 24-Bit Games who do business development, because everybody else doesn't really need it, kind of saw how Free Live succeeded and emulate that, not realizing that Free Lives is an exception, not necessarily a rule. So there just isn't that understanding of like how to pitch, who to pitch to, how to create pitch decks and understand who your audience is, so that you can still stay true to your game and stay true to what you want to make, but also explain it in such a way that the funders are excited. And I mean, I think we came along at a very good point, because we are able to show, look at Black Panther. It made $1 billion. It is predominantly Black people, except your Tolkien white guys. Look at look at what is it, Queen Sono, which is made on the continent, written, directed, acted by people from Africa, #1 in Netflix in the United States. Power, a show. And we can show all of these examples of how particularly the African diaspora, because our audience are the people on the continent, but it's also specifically people of color in the West, right? And we can show how people of color have the buying power and are being underserved, but also how people from other groups are just hungry for new and interesting stories. Like I'm a huge comic book nerd. I love Spider-Man, but like I've seen Peter Parker's story so much. I've seen it. I've seen Uncle Ben die like 3 times. I'd like, give me some Miles Morales. Let's look at something like Into the Spider-Verse that did so well and was so interesting, new and exciting. And so it's also about being able to sell that not only is a game for people on the continent or the African diaspora, but this is what people are hungry for. And being able to then like plan and like kind of accept and plan in that because of a lack of opportunities due to structural issues, not just wealth, but also perceptions around Blackness or being a woman and how difficult it is to be taken seriously within that industry. I mean, I have memories of university getting like the highest mark in my grade or in my year, and people still wouldn't work with me because they just assumed that the white guys did all the work, you know, that bullshit, which they didn't. I was fucking talented.
Yeah.
So, you know, we still have to push against that as well. And because of that, we do have to work with people from different races, I think. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think it's a question of like, are they the performative white people? Because I think that people from other races can be very performative in their allyship and only do sort of the performative work, which I think can be kind of harmful to the people of color you're around, even though I think performative allyship also has its place and its benefits and its uses. But really, you know, finding the people who do the hard work of genuinely being allies without expecting a pat on the back and who don't do it for the clout on social media. And I mean, that's very difficult to find. But I think it's also just a necessity of the industry slowly growing as well. Like the hope is that within the next 5 years, we can have prototype funding on the continent. We can have more publishers coming to events like Fak'ugesi and Playtopia and Africa Games Week, that we can just have more eyeballs to see the talent and more focus on sort of the production and business development element, so we can give the talented, hungry people the tools they need to get to where we are. But I mean, even for Nyamakop, it took 2 years. It took 2 years to just get prototype funding. Never mind full funding, just prototype funding took 2 years. And for a lot of people, that's just too long. So, you know, it's also about fixing these structural issues. I've been going on about this for a long time, but I feel very strongly about this. It's very important to me because I see all of the talented young Black kids coming out of VITS getting eaten up by other industries, because industries that can pay more, because games cannot pay that much. This isn't actually a kitchen. I'm literally in a mud hut with 2 of my nephews running on a treadmill for electricity, and this is just a green screen. You know, it's tough.
Yeah.
I hope that answered some of your questions. Follow me on Twitter. You can ask me more questions.
Last one. I don't know if it's okay, Natalie. Can I ask the last question?
Okay, but there's one more. So yes, you can, but make it short.
It has to be one.
Just one.
Not 3 in 1.
Yeah, one, not 3 ones. The final question that I have is, so right now we've developed a game about like street surfers. I'm not sure if you know these guys, but they're the guys that push around the trolleys, that recycle, they sort of. So we made a racing game about them just to teach children how to recycle, the importance of sorting out trash. It's also at Fak'ugesi. And one of the
serious games.
Yeah, a lot of people love the game, you know, a lot of people think it's crazy. We even have like a whole amapiano, like we've really pushed the Blackness of the game to a point where we're happy and we're satisfied. But then we still get people, especially like funders, who come to us and they're like, why don't you diversify the game more? You know, why don't you add people of different races? You know what I mean? And we kind of have like, we have a hard time answering that question, because the reality is most of these street surfers are Black. You know?
Just add one white guy, just one.
It feels like we're appropriating the culture, you know. Now
I don't think you are. I mean, look. I
Because you've
think
done like
it's sorry. Okay, I'm gonna stop screen sharing because like I can't cope. Um, I think you need to look at it less as appropriating, and you need to start asking the question of like, who is your audience and who are you trying to reach? So if you say your audience are people of color predominantly in South Africa or on the continent, is your game on mobile? Is it easily accessible on the Play Store? If your audience is a little bit wider than that, ask, how does this very South African story or experience, how do you translate it overseas? Just add one white guy. Just treat the one white guy the way the one black character has been treated forever. There are also colored people who do this kind of work. I think it's also important to remember the wide array of stories. But I think that, and I suspect that you probably have a very solid, very good game, that as long as the gameplay is good, it becomes easier to get funders to buy into it, especially if you have like a solid game plan. A big difficulty is just that a lot of us don't have a lot of experience. We're still quite new because there just isn't enough industry to take in a lot of people. So I mean, it's also just the expectation that sometimes like your first 3 or 4 games aren't going to make money. It's going to be very difficult. But once you have those under your belt, it's easier to be perceived as like a lot more serious and taken more seriously by funders. Another thing I would recommend is just, especially now in COVID-19 with everything online, go to all the events. I'm not even exaggerating, like my 50th talk or panel this year, I go to everything. I schmooze, I smile, and I make friends in the industry because I'm an extroverted person stuck in a house all day by myself and my cat, and it's getting kind of weird. But also because I understand the value of just making genuine connections with people, because it's through making those genuine connections and just genuinely making friends that I've also been able to find mentors and ask questions and gain more experience from people I wouldn't necessarily work with or usually meet. I mean, I have a drinking problem now, but like, it's only a problem if I don't have a drink.
I think it's an industry problem. Yesterday, Friday, we had a challenge, a bottle challenge where everyone was taking pictures of what they're drinking for the weekend. So yeah, I think it's an industry problem.
It is. Was there maybe a night where both myself and the creative director were really drunk and hungover and trying to figure out who'd have to spend the morning stand up? Yes.
Yeah.
Did I lose? Yes.
Thank you so much, Limpho.
For sure. I think we have time for one more question. I saw.
Yes, there is one more question. Somebody commended you on your awesome visual references, and they asked, are the products you develop aimed at the diaspora or local audiences and the rest of the continent, so all of them? But I think you
all
did
of them.
That, yeah.
Yeah, all of them. Look, if I'm honest, and if you guys cancel me, I'll understand, it is predominantly for the African diaspora, but only because we're making a PC game and the majority of people on the continent don't play PC. We're hoping to eventually port the game to maybe mobile or to, different consoles to make it more appealing for people on the continent, because I think it's very important that we see ourselves represented in games as well. So it's, the answer to the question is all of the above.
Thank you so much, Dimple. I think that all the things you said was so necessary. Like, first of all, from a Black woman's perspective, from a Black woman who's actually inside. I think all these things really have given us so much. My question was, I think we have like 2 more minutes, but my question was, because I think the gaming community and I think it's such an interesting thing to always hear like game developers or like people in the gaming community speak about like access, and it really doesn't seem like that from the outside. And I don't know if it's because of structures like universities that make it like seem more accessible, because I understand like coming from it and like having like digital art department that there's like gamers and people doing that. But how do people like who are completely on the outside start finding like these communities? Because we talk so much about like gaming communities, Black people in these communities, but like what's a genuine, real, truthful way for somebody who's interested to find?
I think part of it is also just at the consumer facing events having the South African industry there. I think it's also just about how much the industry exposes itself and is willing to do interviews and do talks, like go to consumer facing events like Comic-Con or the Cape Town Expo one. I don't remember, or like FanCon. I think part of it is also just trying to get the word out there. So I mean, there are Facebook groups. There's a Make Games South Africa on Facebook, on Discord. So I think it's also just about like letting people know that it's going on, because a lot of the time what I've noticed is most people just don't know that we have an industry. But I think it's a double whammy. I think on the one hand, it's very hard to get the word out there that the industry exists and that there are people making games in South Africa, some of them making them for South Africa and some for an international audience. There's the perception that you'll never make money in video games, which I probably perpetuate a little bit myself. But I think there's also, I think just people, just like a lot of people don't know, but there's also the second thing of like, I find generally South Africans can look down at their noses at a lot of things made in South Africa. I think it's very difficult if you're in a creative industry to gain respect as a creative, as a director or musician or game developer until you're co-signed by Europe, which is, I'm gonna say this, bullshit. But I think that's a hard narrative to break. And I think that a lot of that media and sort of focus on the media tends to be for middle class people, predominantly middle class white people. And so that sort of spreads everywhere, that idea that our stuff is less than, when in fact we have some of the best film crews in the world, we have some of the best musicians in the world, we have some of the best game developers in the world who've won international game development awards, but who sell like 40 copies in South Africa because it's just, oh, it's South African, it can't be good. Oh, all that stuff. So that's my answer. I don't think it's a very happy answer, but hopefully it'll change.
Yeah,
Hopefully we'll change things.
Cool. So I think it's better that you report on the true status of the industry, the true status of what's happening, and that gives us better indication. It is super exciting and inspiring to even have heard a Black game developer ask you a question on this talk. So I think we're getting there slowly. And yeah, so I think that's it for today's talk. Thank you so much, Dimpo. And
Thank
we
you,
will be
guys.
having, you guys can, if anyone online wants to see more and hear more about game development and all this gaming stuff, we have a really good program this week on that. And Take has also put the People of Play African Game Developers exhibition online on the chat. So if you want to check that out, you may. Thank you everybody for coming.
Also, please follow me on Twitter. You can DM me and inbox me whenever. If anyone feels like they want to continue chatting, just DM me on Twitter and I'll make a Zoom room.
At who? At Dimpo.
Oh, wait, there's a networking event. I can just go join that going live tomorrow. Perfect.
Cool.
Yeah, at just Dimpo. I'll put it in the chat.
Great. So Dimpo's gonna put
it was on my slides, guys.
Her thanks chat, and we're gonna close the event. Thank you everybody for coming, and please join us for more talks this week and almost until mid-November. Cool. Thank you everybody.
Thank you all. Thank you so much. Bye everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.